Welcome to our deep dive
Right.
into Ghana's economic and political landscape.
Sounds good.
Our guide today
Okay.
is a speech delivered by Professor Kwasi Botchwey.
Right.
He's a leading economist
Yes.
who's not just an academic,
Mm.
but has actually shaped Ghana's economic policies.
He has been in the trenches.
Yeah, he's a former finance minister
Yeah.
and currently chairs the National Development Planning Commission.
That's right.
This speech was given on Ghana's 65th independence anniversary,
Uh-huh.
so it's a pretty significant one.
It is.
By the end of this deep dive,
Uh-huh.
you'll understand the economic challenges Ghana faces,
Right.
some historical context, and potential solutions.
Wonderful.
So what makes Professor Botchwey's perspective so valuable?
Well, what makes it so valuable is that he's been in the trenches, so to speak.
Right.
He's not just theorizing about economic problems.
Yeah.
He's grappled with them firsthand.
And he doesn't hold back.
No, he does not.
He paints a stark picture of what he calls Ghana's economic woes. The cedi, Ghana's currency, has depreciated to 8 to the dollar.
Wow.
Fuel prices are soaring at over 8 cedis per liter.
Oof, that's tough.
Inflation is almost 15%.
Yeah.
And government debt is piling up.
So these aren't just abstract numbers.
No.
Think about filling up your tank and realizing it costs almost double what it used to.
Oh, yeah.
Or going to the market and finding your money just doesn't stretch as far.
Right.
That's the reality for many Ghanaians right now.
Absolutely. And he also points out that the government is struggling to fund social programs.
Right.
Like school feeding programs.
Yeah.
And the Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty program,
Mm-hmm.
or LA,
Mm-hmm.
which provides direct cash transfers to extremely poor households.
Very important program.
Professor Botchwey paints a pretty grim picture of social programs at risk.
He does.
What are the potential consequences of this?
Well,
Yeah.
especially for the most vulnerable Ghanaians. Imagine relying on those school meals to ensure your children get at least one nutritious meal a day.
Yeah.
Or depending on that LEAP payment to cover essential expenses.
Right.
When these programs are underfunded,
Yeah.
it pushes people further into poverty
Yeah.
and creates a ripple effect across society.
It's a sobering reminder
Mhm.
that economic policies have real human consequences.
Absolutely.
And Professor Botchwey argues that a core issue behind these struggles
Okay.
is Ghana's declining creditworthiness.
Makes sense.
He's talking about how investors and rating agencies
Mm-hmm.
are losing confidence in the government's ability to manage its finances.
It's like, think of it like building trust with a friend.
Okay.
If you consistently borrow money and pay it back on time,
Yeah.
your friend will trust you more.
Right.
And be willing to lend you larger amounts.
Makes sense.
But if you're unreliable,
Right.
they'll be hesitant.
Sure.
It's the same for countries.
Okay.
Consistent, responsible financial management builds trust with investors, leading to better loan terms and more investment opportunities.
Right.
When a country's creditworthiness declines,
Yeah.
it faces higher interest rates on loans,
Oh.
making it even harder to invest in infrastructure, education, or social programs.
So, no easy fixes then.
It seems not.
Professor Botchwey cautions against what he calls magical solutions
Right.
and really stresses the need for fiscal discipline.
He's talking about the
Yeah.
need to make tough choices and
Wow.
prioritize spending.
Wait.
For example,
Uh,
imagine the Ghanaian government has to decide between investing in a new port facility,
okay.
which could boost trade in the long run,
Yeah.
or increasing funding for the LEA program to provide immediate relief to
Right.
those struggling with poverty.
Mm-hmm.
These are the kinds of trade-offs that
Yeah.
fiscal discipline requires.
Yeah.
It can mean making difficult decisions today
Yeah.
to ensure a more stable future.
Absolutely. And he reminds us that delaying those tough decisions
Mm-hmm.
only makes things worse in the long run. And this is where he draws a parallel to Ghana's economic crisis in the early 1980s,
Okay.
a time of hyperinflation, negative economic growth,
Mm.
and food shortages.
A very difficult time.
The 1980s taught Ghana a harsh lesson.
Yeah.
Delaying tough economic decisions only makes things worse.
It does.
You can't escape fiscal realities,
No?
and sometimes short-term pain is necessary for long-term gain.
You know, reading about Professor Botchwey's mother
Really?
being called a witch because of his policies really struck me.
Wow.
It shows the immense pressure leaders face during times of crisis
Yeah.
and the unexpected ways policies can impact people's lives.
Right.
But even in the face of such personal attacks,
Mhm.
he understood that difficult choices were necessary
Yeah.
to steer the country out of crisis.
He suggests that similar tough choices might be needed today
It's
to
possible.
avoid repeating history.
Yeah.
But he also emphasizes that making those choices
Yeah.
is easier said than done.
It is.
He stresses the need for national consensus on economic reforms.
He's arguing that
Yeah.
for these reforms to work,
Mm.
there needs to be a shared understanding
Okay.
that everyone needs to be on board,
Mm-hmm.
making sacrifices together.
Right. It's about...
It's about building trust
Okay.
between the government and the people,
Yeah.
ensuring that the burden is shared equitably,
Mm.
and that everyone has a stake in the success of these reforms.
Right.
It's a collective effort.
Absolutely. Makes you wonder how you even start building that kind of national consensus,
It's a challenge.
especially when it comes to long-term planning.
Right.
It's not exactly easy to get people excited about a plan.
No,
It spans decades, right?
not really.
Yeah.
That's where Professor Botchwey's focus on continuity and planning comes in.
Okay.
He highlights the role of the National Development Planning Commission,
Okay.
or NDPC.
ADPC, okay.
This body is actually enshrined in Ghana's constitution,
Wow.
which shows how much emphasis is placed on plan development.
So it's not just a random committee.
No, it's not.
It's actually part of the legal framework of the country.
It is.
That's pretty interesting.
It is.
But as Professor Botchwey points out, Ghana's history with development planning
Right.
has been a bit up and down.
It has.
He takes us through various plans over the years,
Yeah.
starting with the ambitious 7-year plan for national reconstruction
Mm-hmm.
back in the First Republic, which aimed to completely transform Ghana's economy and society.
An ambitious plan.
Then there was Vision 2020,
Yes.
a long-term plan adopted in 1994,
Yeah,
which had some successes,
it did.
but ultimately didn't achieve all of its goals.
That's often the case.
So there have been attempts at long-term planning,
Yes.
but it sounds like there hasn't always been follow-through.
That's a major challenge
Right.
for long-term planning.
Okay.
Political will and continuity.
Yeah.
New governments often come in with their own priorities,
Right.
which may not align with plans developed by previous administrations.
Five, of course.
Professor Botchwey mentions that under his chairmanship,
Yeah.
the NDPC produced a comprehensive 40-year plan
Whoa.
submitted to the government back in 2017.
A 40-year plan.
Yes,
That's some serious long-term thinking.
it is.
But what happens if the government changes hands
Right.
multiple times during that 40-year period?
That's exactly the point Professor Botchwey is making.
Right.
Without that commitment to continuity,
Yeah.
regardless of who's in power,
Ah.
these long-term plans become more like wish lists
Right.
than actionable roadmaps.
Makes sense.
And he uses a fascinating example
Okay.
to illustrate the lack of progress in certain areas.
Okay.
He quotes a British journalist from 1874
Wow.
who was describing street hawking in Accra.
1874, that's taking it way back.
It is.
Yeah.
So what's the connection?
What's striking is that this anecdote shows
Yeah.
that some challenges have persisted for over a century.
Like what?
Street hawking,
Okay.
while providing a livelihood for many.
Also reflects ongoing issues
Okay.
of urbanization, unemployment, and the need for better infrastructure.
So even with all these plans and visions,
Yes,
some things just haven't changed that much.
it's right.
It's like we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it underscores Professor Botchwey's point
Okay.
about the need for consistent long-term planning that goes beyond the short-term thinking
Right.
of political cycles.
Right.
He argues that Ghana needs to make a clear decision
About what?
about the role of the NDPC
Okay.
and whether it's truly committed to using it to shape the country's future.
Yeah.
He believes that a strong NDPC with genuine government support
Right.
can provide that long-term vision and consistency needed to address these deep-rooted challenges.
So it's not just about creating a plan,
No.
but about having the commitment to see it through.
Yeah. No matter who's in charge.
Right. It's about establishing a system where national development goals transcend political parties and individual leaders,
That's the idea.
and instead are viewed as shared objectives for the long-term benefit of the nation.
Exactly.
Now, alongside economic planning,
Right.
Professor Botchwey also emphasizes the connection between
Yeah.
economic progress and what he calls democratic consolidation.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
So-
I mean, you can't really have a thriving economy
It's hard.
if the political system is unstable.
Right. He's arguing that sustainable economic development relies on a strong, functioning democracy.
Right.
This means protecting the independence of institutions.
Like what?
Like the Electoral Commission, the judiciary, and the press.
He's basically saying that a healthy democracy sets the stage for a healthy economy.
It's about transparency. Accountability, a level playing field.
Think about it. If you don't trust the electoral process or believe the courts are corrupt, you're less likely to invest in a country.
Exactly. A strong, independent judiciary is vital for a stable investment climate because it means contracts will be enforced fairly. A free press keeps those in power accountable for economic mismanagement.
Makes sense.
Without these checks and balances, corruption can flourish, which undermines economic growth.
And that can make international investors hesitant?
It can.
To put their money into the country.
Absolutely.
It seems like Professor Botchwey is saying that these things all work together.
They do.
But then he also brings up this idea of informal layers of power. Which sounds a bit ominous.
This is where things get a little more complicated. He's describing individuals or groups with significant influence behind the scenes, often operating without any real accountability.
So you might have these official institutions and processes in place, but there's this whole other network of power working in the shadows.
That's what he's suggesting.
That sounds like a real challenge.
It is.
To transparency and good governance.
He gives the example of the Land Commission, highlighting how difficult it is for people to register land titles. It should be a straightforward process, but it often gets bogged down.
By what?
By bureaucracy delays and even corruption.
And that can have huge consequences for people.
It can.
Especially if they're trying to use their land for a home or a business.
Exactly.
It highlights how these informal power structures can impact people's everyday lives.
They do.
And Professor Botchwey warns that these informal layers of power can have a very corrosive effect on democracy.
It's true.
They erode trust in the system and make people feel like the system is rigged. It's like having a shadow government that operates in the dark. Pulling strings and influencing outcomes without any oversight.
It's a concern.
That's a little unsettling, to be honest.
I agree.
But he's not just focusing on these behind-the-scenes power dynamics.
No.
He also talks about something that feels very relevant today. The state of public discourse.
Definitely. He expresses concern about what he calls gratuitous insult and profane attacks on persons that have become all too common in political discussions.
It's like...
He's worried about the decline of reasoned debate.
I agree.
And the tendency to resort to personal attacks rather than engaging with the issues.
It's like people have forgotten how to disagree respectfully and constructively.
It does feel that way.
It feels like we're constantly bombarded with negativity and aggression, especially online.
He specifically mentions the way people use anonymity on social media to spread hateful rhetoric and misinformation. It's easy to hide behind a fake profile and launch attacks without any consequences.
It's true.
And this type of toxic online environment can spill over into the real world.
For sure.
Making it even harder to have productive conversations.
It looks like we've lost the ability to listen to each other, to consider different perspectives, and to find common ground.
Professor Botchwey sees this as a real threat.
To what?
To democracy. He argues that healthy democracies rely on a commitment.
To what?
To civil discourse. A willingness to listen to different viewpoints and a respect for the dignity of all individuals.
So it's not just about institutions and laws. It's also about how we treat each other.
It is.
And how we engage in debate. It's about creating a space where people feel safe.
Absolutely.
To express their opinions without fear of being attacked or ridiculed.
Exactly.
He sees this as a crucial part of strengthening Ghana's democracy. Alongside protecting institutions and addressing those informal power structures we talked about earlier.
It's all connected.
It's all connected, isn't it?
This economy, the political system, the way we interact with each other. It's all part of creating a society that is fair, just, and prosperous.
And ultimately, he believes that this commitment to democratic values is not just good for political stability, but it's essential for sustainable economic progress.
So if we want to see real, lasting economic growth,
yes,
we need to invest in building a strong and vibrant democracy.
Absolutely. Reinforce each other.
It sounds like as we wrap up our deep dive into Professor Botchwey's speech, it's clear that he offers a very comprehensive analysis of Ghana's challenges and opportunities.
Very much so.
He doesn't sugarcoat the economic difficulties, but he also presents a path forward, emphasizing things like fiscal discipline, national consensus, long-term planning, and strengthening democratic institutions.
It's a holistic approach.
And he reminds us that there are no quick fixes.
That sustainable change requires difficult choices. Shared sacrifice and a long-term vision.
He leaves us with a lot to think about.
He does.
Especially in terms of the role of informal power structures, the importance of civil discourse, and the need to create a society where everyone feels heard and respected.
It's a call to action.
It is.
Not just for Ghana, but for all of us.
Absolutely.
If Professor Botchwey were giving this speech today, what would he say about the progress made in addressing these issues?
That's a good question.
Would he see signs of hope? Or would he be even more concerned?
I think that's a question worth pondering.
It is.
And this deep dive is just a starting point.
Absolutely.
I encourage you to continue exploring these issues and to engage in constructive dialogue about how we can build a better future, not just for Ghana, but for all of us.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Keep learning, keep questioning.
Yes.
And keep striving for a more just and equitable world.